You guys hear me okay? No.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Ms. Bates, Mr. Bowman.
Here. I'm sorry.
Are you here?
Here. Yeah.
Last time I checked.
All right. Mr. Gussenberg.
Here.
Ms. Harrigan.
Here.
Mr. Martin. Vice Chairman Martinez.
Here.
Mr. Neff.
Here.
Ms. Nichols.
Here.
Ms. O'Donnell.
Here.
Mr. Orris. Mr. Pangaro. Mr. Perugini.
Here.
And Mr. Walsh.
Here.
You have a quorum of the School Modernization.
All right, let's stand up for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of the
United States of America.
and
To
to
the
the republic
which
for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
liberty, and justice for all.
justice for all.
All right, thank you everyone for joining in. Today is August 19th, School Modernization Committee. We do have a new member today. Mrs. Kate O'Donnell has been appointed by the Town Council. We're very happy to have her. Mrs. Nichols, would you like to make an introduction of our new member?
I would. Thank you so much, Renee. I would like to introduce you. Some of you know Kate already. Kate O'Donnell is a very skilled educator. She's worked for 26 years in the Wallingford school system. She will perhaps blush a little bit, but when I brag about the fact that she graduated with the highest grade point average when she graduated from college in the entire class. So we know she studies and reads and does pretty well at that. Currently, she's the Science Technology Curriculum Coordinator in Wallingford, and she's held lots of positions in teaching from pre-K right up through high school. She has been served on many committees in Wallingford, district committees as chair or as a committee member, and many of those committees have created some very, very worthwhile projects. One of the most well-known of those was a technology, it was called the Innovation Team, and it was in 2012 and 13, but it was a mastery-based learning program, and it really has changed a lot in the way kids in Wallingford are educated. So she's very committed. She lived in Cheshire for forever, at least, I don't know when you moved here, but for a long time, probably
25
30.
years.
How many years?
25.
25 years. Okay. Her kids are educated in school, started at Darcy, Norton, Dodd, and both of boys have graduated from Cheshire High School and are full-time students now, college students. So she's enthusiastic, she's organized, she has some experience in the education field. And from my perspective, I think from our conversations in the last few days, we all agree that it's valuable to have a variety of perspectives here in this committee. And I think Kate will bring educational experience, organizational skills. She's her own person. She is collaborative. She has energy. She's a good leader. And I'm confident that she will help us continue to do the good work we were entrusted to do. So welcome, Kate. We'll enjoy having you on the committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Kate. Thank you very much for volunteering and accepting to join us. That's great. Very excited to keep rolling here. So I'm sure there's a lot that you need to catch up on to. So if you need a resource, I mean, I know everybody here is very helpful, including Chuck from Colliers, who's at this point have gained a lot of knowledge of what we're doing, but even myself, if you need to give me a phone call or anyone else in the committee, please feel free. I think we'll all do our best to bring you up to speed quickly. So with that, next item in the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 3rd meeting. Anyone make a motion? to
So
approve
moved.
the minutes?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right, great. The next agenda item that we have in the
We're supposed to,
agenda.
we should vote on that. We should
Oh, I'm
just-
sorry.
sorry, Just Robert's rules.
Yes, Robert
All right.
rules. Okay. All in
All right.
favor? Yeah.
A vote to approve the minutes.
Aye.
All right, minutes are approved. The next item in the agenda is the election of the chair and vice chair, and really, I put that in here just because I wasn't really expecting that a decision would be made today. But I remember from last time, it really took at least 3 meetings to get everybody on board and to get potential candidates thinking about whether they wanted to volunteer for the positions. So just wanted to put it on the agenda so everybody starts thinking about it, have a little discussion about it today, and also discuss, what other requirements we need to actually make this election happen. A lot of people have come forward via email and calls and stated that they would like to see the committee fully staffed before this vote takes place, and we're lucky to have Ms. O'Donnell joining us tonight. There's still one vacancy from Mr. Talbot, who resigned on August 3rd. So we're looking for the town council to fill that vacancy as well. And perhaps after that, we can move forward to the next step and take the votes. But does anyone have an opinion on next steps for this election?
Has Mr. Talbot officially resigned?
He did.
Yes, Matt, he did.
When was it received?
Yesterday, I believe it was, the letter was received in the town clerk's office.
Thank you.
So yeah, over the next couple of days, let's start thinking about who wants to volunteer for the chair position. I will say that I am willing to remain as acting chair for as long as it is required to keep the process moving forward. So I'm committed to that and want everybody to know that. But I think it is fair that the committee has a permanent chair, and that whoever that chair is thinks about the responsibility and the time commitment that comes with it. So that was the purpose of putting it as an agenda item today, so we can start thinking about that. So I'm hoping that by the time of our next meeting, we have some candidates that come forward with interest on being the chair and vice chair, and that we can hold an election. Any additional comments on that, Ms. Harrigan?
Yeah, first of all, thanks Renee for agreeing to stay on as acting chair for as long as we need you, I hope. But my second question would be if you are willing to continue to be vice chair, which is the position that you've already been elected to, there's a chance that we don't have to have a vote for a vice chair, right?
Right. Yes, I'm interested in remaining as vice chair, but I think that the position of chair and vice chair is kind of a package. I think it'd be interesting to see a balance of skills. For example, my skill set is in construction. Perhaps you don't want to see 2 construction people as chair and vice chair, because I don't think that's fair to the process. So depending who's elected for chair, I think the election of vice chair should follow that and bring the diversity to the 2 positions. So,
I know Arnett's not here. I'm sorry, Ann, I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh, me, no. Thank you,
Oh.
Renee.
yeah.
The board of bylaws, I'm probably a little different in town, but if an officer or a board member leaves a held officer position in the Board of Ed, I believe we just usually have an election to elect that position. So I'm not sure if this, so I think Ann's point is, I mean, if vice chair, it's great. I would hope you would consider the chair role as well. But I think you would have to relinquish the role of vice chair in order for it to come up as something to vote on. Just procedural note, but Sean, we can validate with Arnett.
Yeah,
But-
but that's my understanding too, Tony.
But in the meantime, anyone that's interested, you know, I would reach out to Sean, Arnett, talk about the particulars around it. You know, there's a great support team at Town Hall. Board's willing to support folks as well. So think about it, and hopefully get this resolved soon. I had a general question. It sounds like Peter's letter was received yesterday, so my guess is soon the town council will have a person to backfill that role. Maybe by the
Yeah,
next meeting.
Tony, I think I may correct that letter may have been received today. It came in an email and I'm not sure if it was yesterday or today. So I want to just correct that, but there has been a letter received by the town, but it was not received in time for our council meeting last night. So that's why we just filled the vacant position that was
Sure.
there.
No, that's good. I'm just saying, maybe by the next
Right.
meeting, we'll all be here. In the
Yeah.
interim, you know, hopefully everyone's here, we can weigh in, but I hope folks do step up for the role. It's a very important project, and don't be shy. You will have a lot of support. That's it, Renee. Thank you.
No, thank you. And, you know, I've been talking to a few of the members, and there's certainly interest out there. So I'm pretty sure we'll be able to fill the role when it comes. In terms of relinquishing the vice chair position, I wouldn't be opposed to that, just for just to comply with a better, more straightforward process. I believe that chair and vice chair should bring some kind of diversity in terms of skill set for the group. I think we'll all benefit from that.
Sylvia,
So we'll add. Yes, please go ahead, Sylvia.
the position that has been vacated by Mr. Talbot will be filled by the Democrat on the council. Is that correct?
I believe so, Matt. I'm not 100% sure how that structure is, and I wouldn't want to speak to it definitively, but I believe it was 2 of the majority party and 1 of the minority party representatives from the council. So that leaves Mr. Jinks as the other person on the council. Now, if he is quite committed to a lot of other things, so we have to see how that's going to play out, I think. Yeah.
Okay,
But I believe I believe you're right about that.
thank you.
So what's the next step, Sylvia? Will this be on the agenda for the next town council meeting? I assume?
It will be up for discussion, yes. And we, I don't know if when's our next one, Sean? Is it September 8th? Is that going to be the next council meeting?
There's a regular meeting, the next regular meeting is September.
Is the 8th, right? Possibly, we're not scheduled for one in between, are we?
Not currently, but
No, because you're away and, yeah, right. So September 8th.
Oh, okay.
you can certainly schedule a special meeting in between.
We could.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about next meetings here towards the end. But yeah, we should plan our next meeting around where you're gonna, after you do yours, hopefully, so we have that additional member, and so we could hold the vote. I certainly don't wanna schedule it before, knowing that our next meeting is scheduled for Labor Day, which is September 7th. So
Yeah.
we'll,
We would be willing to work with you to affect that. We're all sensitive to the fact that we want the committee to be up and running quickly. So if we can discuss between you and Rob when this committee will next meet. I don't know if our meeting will actually be held on Labor Day. I would think not, but perhaps. So we would want to make sure that we coordinated a date. I'm sure we could make that happen.
yeah, no, that's perfect. Okay, any additional comments on agenda item 4, election of chair and vice chair? Okay, perfect. The next item is the status report by Collier. So we have Mr. Chuck Warrington here with us today. They've been visiting the schools and are planning to release a report on that pretty soon. They've also been working closely with Melona McBroom on the projections. So they don't, their work is still in development. So this is more of a quick update rather than a big dissertation of their findings. I think I consider it was appropriate to give them an opportunity to give us an update. I think part of what the committee wants to hear is that constant update so we can provide our feedback on how things are going. So with that, Chuck, you want to give us a quick rundown of what your team is working through?
Sure. Thanks, Renee. Chuck Warrington with Collier's Project Leaders. I've John Copeless with me as well. So the last couple of weeks, again, a majority of the work is really lying with Melona McBroom. They're still working on those background demographics and enrollments and working on the projected enrollments for the as-is situation, if you will. Then once we deliver those to the committee, and that should be probably in the second meeting next month, we're targeting to have those delivered. On those, then we can start talking about options. As far as our work, yesterday we spent just about the whole day. We went around with Vin Massiana and Rich Clavette, the facilities director, and we looked at all the schools and just wanted to kind of get an idea of, the condition of the schools, get a feel for them, so that when we're talking about them, just visually, we understand which one, what they look like, and kind of get an idea for the feel of those. But we looked at all of them except for the high school. We drove around the outside, but it was late in the day, and we're rescheduling for next week to walk through that one. Overall, your schools are maintained very well. Almost to the point where they probably, and we see this quite a bit, they probably mask the underlying conditions that exist. Primarily your mechanicals and your electrical systems are very tired. I mean, these buildings, I think we all know, haven't been upgraded or renovated in a long time, probably since they've been built. But your district has done a great job of maintaining those systems and keeping them up and running. But they are going to get to that point where there's going to, I would expect there to be some major repairs are going to be needed. I know there's capital improvement plan out there, but based on our experience, these are all getting to the age where they need a pretty good overhaul, probably. I think one of the biggest things we saw out there on the buildings themselves is probably your building envelopes, your roof, your windows, doors. Those are typically in this era building the areas that really probably have the most impact, because you don't obviously want to renovate the inside of a structure, whether it's your home or a school, without doing the roof and the windows and the siding or the brick, if you will, before that. And that's kind of was a general observation across all the schools. Again, they're maintained extremely well. I was walking through, they're super clean, they're well maintained, they're bright, everything's painted fresh, and for the layperson walking through, some may say, well, what do we need to do here? Let's just keep doing what we're doing. But they don't see the mechanicals or the indoor air quality, the lack of ventilation. Yesterday was not too bad because it wasn't as hot, but certainly I think we were at Chapman on the backside of the school where the sun was coming through the windows, and those are taller classrooms in there. Very hot on one side, then you go on the other side, I think it was on the west side towards Route 10, and those were cool. But on the opposite side of the day, coming on the later part of the day, that probably heats up pretty good. I think we were talking at, just remembering a couple of conversations at Dodd. They're saying at the middle school, the second floor gets warm in a really hot day, and the custodian was saying above the ceiling tile they have layers of just fiberglass insulation, trying to keep that heat and probably the cold, for that matter. If you get heat coming in, you're getting cold coming in. That roof's probably not properly insulated to today's standards, so it's probably losing a lot of energy. But to do any upgrades such as mechanical systems, if you will, and I know probably like people are saying, hey, we need to get a new HVAC system and controls, et cetera. especially with COVID here. To do that without doing your building envelope, you're just wasting money. Frankly, you're just gonna take energy and just push it right out that building envelope. So there's a method to that madness of having that building envelope, the roof and the windows and the doors in a like new condition before you do those upgrades. HVAC systems, when you start getting into that, it's not as simple as just putting new HVAC systems. Now you're probably talking new electrical systems and upgrading those for the additional power. One thing we always remind folks is although these systems are typically more efficient, doesn't mean they use less energy. They're bigger systems, air conditioning, heating, moving air. They use more energy, but they are efficient. So there's sometimes a little bit of a confusion between that terminology. When we hear more efficient, we tend to think it's less energy, but it's not necessarily the case. So there's upgrades there. And then I think the other one, with the exception of maybe one or two of the sites, you have some pretty tight sites on your certainly Dye Middle School is really small. I think it's 10.5 acres, and you have 700, closest, I think 700 kids right now. That would typically be about a 20-acre site according to the state guidelines. So that site in itself is pretty small, and I think that's probably part of the reason why in the last studies, Perkins Eastman and the board probably was looking at a potentially new school. And I'm just kind of throwing out ideas here. If you're looking at an option to go to maybe from a grade 6 to 8 there's really no room to expand there. It's so tight. You're in the middle of a neighborhood, pretty landlocked. That'd be a big challenge because you'd have to take away fields. And frankly, there's only 2 fields, the upper field and the lower field, supporting that school as it is. So those are some of the things, we're going to look at as we're strategizing on potential options. And with you, let me stress that it's going to be a conversation of, what are some of the preliminary thoughts on your program, and most importantly is getting the Board of Ed involved in understanding superintendent's vision and the Board of Ed's vision for the school districts as well. You look back at some of the space standards and the size of schools, everything's pretty close to the size it should be. They can flex a little bit depending on those special programs, but for the most part, they're pretty close. So you may have some minor additions if we do those. But I think having worked in other districts in similar fashions, I think one of the major conversations is going to come is phasing. And when we get into, we start looking at elementary schools, phasing a project and doing hazardous abatement with young kids, let alone high school kids, is a little bit unresting for parents and the community. And so part of that's going to be, our strategies are looking at how can we maximize some phasing to mitigate impact to students and teachers and operations. That might come into play with, when we're looking at either the middle school or the high school options with that. But definitely with elementary schools, if we can get the kids out of the way in another location, that's ideal, but sometimes we can't do that. So we'll have to evaluate those. There's a lot of balls up in the air that we look at. And but overall, again, I want to stress your schools are considering the age, they're in very good condition. The central office, we took a look at that. We understand that is an older building, but we understand it is owned by the town. There is some maintenance cost to it, but it's in the center of town. It's a beautiful building. Needs a little bit of love there, but overall, it's a unique building. It's got a lot of character to it as well. But I think any major program like this, typically the Board of Eds, you're looking towards the end of a program, because that doesn't as directly impact your students as like the school projects. But overall, it's a great tour, and we're going to finish up with Vin and Rich next week. And then in a couple of weeks after that, we'll have our enrollment projections with Malone and really start kind of roll our sleeves up and get into the good stuff that I know all you are looking forward to getting into.
Thank you, Chuck. Did you see any major ADA challenges at any of the schools with different levels and different accessibility to portions of the building?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and we didn't take copious notes, we weren't doing an FCA walk. It was more to get us familiar, but
Right.
certainly, I mean, I think there's certainly some site challenges with ADA at some of those. I'm thinking at Darcy, you have the before and after school programs, and I believe that's at every school. There's a lower level access there, but they do have an elevator within the school. A lot of schools, there's a lot of ramps to these schools. It was kind of interesting how many ramps were in every school. Usually you have one or two schools that have, a certain amount of ramps. It was I actually made that comment yesterday to Vin. I haven't seen as many ramps. We had a lot of steps in yesterday, and but not super egregious. Obviously, the central office is not accessible. That would probably, depend on what the long-term plan is for that. You might want to consider an elevator there. And certainly, I'm just trying to go through. It was Chapman. Chapman's got a challenge because we were talking about the security vestibules that the new standards talk about, and that lobby, obviously, you go up about 10, 12 steps to get up to the main office. So to create a vestibule, a security vestibule, has some challenges there associated with it. So, but other than that, there's no, the accessibility is a bit limited in that building. So there's definitely challenges, I think, in about every building on that one.
Right. Right. That's consistent to some of the things we saw. Mr. Gossenberg.
Yeah, Chuck, you've mentioned Humiston a couple of times. I just wanted to remind everyone that the back building of Humiston is also a school. That's where the alternative high school is. And that's totally not ABA compliant. There's 3 floors to that and no elevator, no ramps, nothing like that.
Correct. Yeah. We did walk through the alternative. We went through the whole facility, both the alternative high school.
Okay.
Another of the items that popped out during some of our meetings was auditoriums and assembly spaces. Do you have any initial reactions from what you saw?
I'm going off of my memory here. One thing that popped out, I know Dodd, I gotta say that one was, I thought, in really good condition. I mean, you have that combine, the auditorium. I think it was a cafetorium, if I remember that one. Good sized stage, actually bigger than what we would typically see in a middle school. Believe it or not, these days, pretty good size. And then the gym was beautiful there. That facility was pretty impressive and had, I thought, some pretty good bones to it. For it. But then some of the other ones, I want to say Norton, like that gym in there was a little bit smaller. What was really stuck out to me was really the kitchen and serving lines. You've expanded some of these buildings, and some of those have single serving lines, where in today's standards you would have dual serving lines. And I think the district's talking about enhancing some of those to provide 2. So that was one thing with respect to cafetorium / auditorium that kind of stuck out a bit to me. What's interesting with auditoriums, just kind of up front for everybody to know, is the state now, they will only support auditoriums that hold the 50% capacity of the enrollment, which is not necessarily ideal for a lot of schools and districts. They want to have the whole student body there, but that's a policy they have nowadays. So something to kind of keep in mind as we're looking at, probably more so the high school or the middle school, whatever option comes out of those, for the most part. So that'll be a bit of a restriction. And the other thing, and this is common all over the state, is there's never enough parking. Parent bus loops are never long enough, and the bus drop-offs are sometimes challenging. But we haven't built one school where we have enough parking, even on a new one. There's never enough property. And then when you start looking at the usages, when you have 3 or 4 events a year that require more attendees and the parents, you're only talking 3 or 4 versus everyday operations. So.
Mr. Gossenberg.
Just a couple of quick comments. When we did some of our visitations, I know that even though they couldn't build auditoriums that would accommodate everyone, they often were then supplementing that with a gymnasium that had seating capacity so that if you wanted to bring the whole student body together, that was another option rather than having a huge auditorium. The second comment is that when we met with the Dodd staff, they talked a lot about the inadequacy of the cafeteria auditorium, the small size, the fact that with only one facility, they had very limited access to it because there were lunch waves running for quite some time. And, there was a real plea, and also the location, which evidently they felt, was very difficult to get in and out
Very
of
north end.
that space. Yeah, since it was off to one side of the building. So as we're looking at it and talking about it, and, I don't know what will eventually happen with Dodd, but I know that that was a real high item on their wish list, is to have a larger, more flexible space for a cafeteria and a separate space for an auditorium.
Any additional questions for Colliers today? Mr. Pergini?
Not a question, but just a comment, picking back on what Rich said. We have a board meeting tomorrow night talking more detail about the reopening plan and some of the challenges. And one of the things that Jeff and Vincent, Marlene team run into is, particularly at the high school, is with the COVID situation, inadequate spacing, et cetera. We're trying to find creative ways to handle the lunch waves, even with a hybrid model where half the student populations in the building at one time. I mean, who knew COVID was going to hit 50 years ago when these buildings were designed? But I will tell you that across most of our schools, if we had a separate cafeteria, a separate auditorium space, not only would it help the students get their lunch quicker and actually be able to use a full 12 to 20 minutes for lunch, but we'd have that extra space where we can accommodate some situations where we have to distance students. We have that swing space with a dedicated auditorium and so forth. So for what it's worth, I know COVID is not necessarily a factor in this plan and probably won't change. Chuck mentioned it last meeting, the state really hasn't come out with any guidance for spacing with COVID and new school development, but the separation of those two areas would benefit us greatly in a number of ways. That's all.
Mr. Knapp?
Yeah, I just had a question for Chuck. Do you have the schedule that you can pull up that you had before in Excel?
Do.
I recall the 19th, we were supposed to be getting an update from Mylona McBroom and a presentation of kind of where they were at. Last time on the meeting, we also had an agenda item and we skipped over it. So I just want to know where they're at with presenting.
That's for towards the for this 19th, Chuck, or for the next one? Because I know they're kind of in the midst. They're in the midst of we had a review of preliminary findings, and I was looking at that earlier.
Yep.
They're still in the midst of putting together their numbers and their full enrollment, so they don't have a presentation for tonight, but they're still in the midst of doing the comprehensive analysis and the enrollment projections for that. And I think looking at the schedule here, Chuck, it's probably the second week in September that would be looking for a full report from Malone and what their findings are in a comprehensive report.
Does that mean we're 3 weeks behind from where we thought we would be?
I don't necessarily think we're behind on that one, Chuck. Looking at this now, like we have our review of our, kind of the preliminary on the initial data, and I think it's probably more geared towards Collier's preliminary stuff versus Malone. As you can see, they still have a couple more items that they have to complete in order to complete their stuff. So I don't think we're necessarily behind it, just they'll report everything all at once in September.
So if I look at this calendar and on row 17, you have MMI enrollment projections.
Yep.
And that is for the second week of September. We're still on track for making that that deadline, is what you're saying.
That's correct. We met, I think it was last week or week before ourselves. I think Renee, you weren't able to make it, but with
Yeah.
Ben and Mike Zuba and his team, and they're on schedule to deliver that in September. So we didn't lose any time per se, if that's the question. We haven't lost any time in regards to their work.
I just want to make sure that the meeting that's on the calendar for the 18th there, we're actually going to have a review of data, because I feel like, well, I appreciate a lot of the stuff you said, and I feel like we're saying the same things we've been saying for 6 months about a lot of these schools with walking through them and stuff. And I just want to start moving forward with, learning some of the data, what we're actually going to do, instead of talking about the ADA issues that we know about and the size and everything. I just feel like we're stuck in neutral there.
Yeah, I totally understand, Chuck, and nothing I said earlier, with our walkthrough. And again, our walkthrough is more for our edifice, to be honest, and to get us familiar. I know Mark Sklenka had done a couple walkthroughs with the committee in the past, but you really the data that's in the Perkins Eastman FCAs, there's not much that's really changed there. They pretty much hit the high level points. For us, is more to just get familiar with it and walk through those, not so much to report, give you anything new. Everybody's seen them. I think you're all familiar with those conditions. But once we get the updated projections and the enrollments from there, and they're going to give you what the current model's looking like, all the, when you talk about the birth rates and migration and moving in, all those demographic properties they talk about, it's probably gonna be about a 40-page presentation that they come up with. It's pretty detailed. You're gonna be pretty impressed with that. And then once that occurs, and I think probably at the next meeting, I think we should start, what I'd like to start soliciting is ideas from the committee as to what your committee or I don't know, individuals, how you want to do it. What type of envisions do you folks have for ideas for these schools? Because obviously you've been in town a long time, you know a lot more about it than we do. You've seen the schools a lot more, you've heard a lot more feedback from faculty and staff and parents. Like to get an idea of, what are some of the thoughts that this committee's thinking for the future of the schools, and obviously we need the Board of Ed involved there. I think the last studies was, from Perkins was, a new elementary or new middle school to replace Dot. Well, is that really an option? We have to look at the financials on it, but typically when we get into these, there's preliminary thoughts and ideas of what the program might look like, and then we have to evaluate, does the data support that program? Is there a thought of, again, I want to keep stressing the Board of Ed because they write the ed specs and they have to adopt the plan. Are we keeping all your elementary schools online? Are we trying to take a building offline? It gets into a bigger scheme of the town and the operations and stuff. So we'd really like to get some ideas from the committee of, what are some of the preliminary thoughts for the plan maybe?
Yeah, that's a great point. We had, right after the committee performed all of the school visits, Anne Marie had put together a summary of basically the two different paths that we as a committee seem to have been converging around, which at the time were either leading with a high school or leading with the middle school. So those were the two prevalent paths that we were discussing. So perhaps, I think there were some good bullet points there. I'm gonna circulate that email around again, just so we start giving that some thoughts, and perhaps when we come back for the next session, we'll add that brainstorming session as an agenda item, and then we'll, yeah, exactly that.
That the one there, Renee?
Yes, that is the one. Yeah, so maybe we'll add that as an agenda item for next time. And I'm sure, it's been a while. That was in May. I'm sure there's some other ideas as well. So I want to resend that in advance. So, if there's any additional ideas, people have the opportunity to chime in via email, and then we'll put together an agenda item to discuss.
Chuck, it's Tony. Quick question. Great idea. Again, the idea is I think that this committee has seen a lot, digested a lot. We've heard some good ideas come out already. And this document's can help a lot. So I know Amory put this together. It does a good job of consolidating what we're seeing and some thoughts. The question I have is, and it's been 4 years. I can't remember exactly what Perkins Eastman did, but I believe when we went through that assessment, that board, they helped us quantify the options that we considered. So it wasn't just us sitting in a room saying, "Oh, let's start at the high school or middle school." And I can't remember the mechanism, but do you have perhaps some kind of scorecard or template that we can use to help quantify these ideas so that when we get into the discussion, ultimately it doesn't become an endless subjective discussion of where to start with, but maybe is there a way to rank some of these things where we can get a scorecard? It may not be necessarily possible, but it might help because there's a lot of good ideas, number one. And number two, at which point do you need some financial guidance on a budget? I know it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? We're going to have ideas, there's going to have costs to them. Ultimately, we're going to crash whatever comes out of this against some kind of estimate budget the town can't afford. And that might play a role, I think, in how much we can and can't do. So kind of curious when you guys need to see that parameter in this process.
Yeah, as far as the first part for like evaluating the options and kind of a matrix of ranking these, if you will. And I was trying to look it up, but yeah, we do have one example that when we worked with Malone McBroom and Weathersfield on their elementary school master plan, and I was hoping to try to find.
No, I'm gonna put you on the spot, but if you have.
Well, yeah, we do have a matrix that we propose.
Yeah,
but
we're looking forward to that. It's good.
Yeah, we have a matrix, and we can start with it, and then basically the criteria. You tweak the criteria based on what are the important factors in Cheshire. We'll start with a basic, and then we tweak them and go, okay, obviously, tax impact is a huge one. Length and duration, and it might be impact to students as far as like phasing, depending on what the options are. Less impact, it could be better. Overall operating cost. There's a lot of factors, but we do have a matrix for that. And it kind of gives you a ranking. And even though some options may rank higher, there may be other factors of it that say, yeah, it ranks higher. However, this one still is a better option. As far as the cost goes, once we start dialing into the options and we review them and there's a consensus of say 3 or 4 options, if you will, might be 5, doesn't matter. At that point, instead of you giving us a range of the budgets, what I recommend is let us develop what we do a high-low probable of the range, and it depends. And there's varying factors in those, primarily the square footage of the building, and then what the final, because we're not going to know what the final ed spec is yet in the final size. So we'll give a range of what we think it might be, and then that way we're giving it to you unbiased, without, okay, we're looking to target $50 million for a middle school. Well, let us give you what the range is based upon the square footage, the site, and some assumptions, and let you react to that is what I would recommend. Because you say, okay, it's, I'm using 50 million as a number. I don't want to back into 50 because that's a bad budget. We're going to give you a realistic budget and go, here's the real cost in the range to begin with. And then as we fine tune those options, we start dialing in and fine tuning those options. Those are the later phases when whatever the first project is, then that's when we start doing geotechnical borings, checking the wetlands, looking at hazmat, and really dialing in on those, as well as an ed spec in a program itself, more specifically. But also with those ranges, Tony, we'll also develop cash flow projections based upon a schedule, because you can have an option, but we also have to have a schedule associated with it because of the time cost factor that goes with it. And then we'll take that budget and we'll blow it all the way out over, it could be sometimes 7-8 years. And we'll give it to your financial folks to to kind of bring that into your total town debt service and go, because you may have other projects where the debt's coming off,
Yeah, of course.
payments are coming off. We don't know that, but we just give you, hey, here's the estimated monthly bill each month for these projects. And it's not just construction, it's your soft costs, your architect's fees, et cetera, throughout the project. And if you have multiple phases, there may be overlapping costs between one referendum, say, to another. And again, they can map that out over the years and go, the cost to the average taxpayer based upon a median household is X. And we'll provide that cash flow to you. So that's what I would recommend, is let us give you a range and let you react to it. And maybe, hey, that's too much, or okay, that's kind of what we thought. And I think sometimes when there's a preconceived notion, if we're not careful, you could develop a bad budget.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good approach. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Bowman.
You had made a statement that the schools could be inefficient as they're running today. Can we integrate the efficiency savings in what we're doing into a new school to see if we can offset some of the cost to the taxpayers, as in closing schools, closing Humiston, for instance, or Darcy, and see what those savings, if those savings are going to, help defray the tax consequences to our population. The other question that I had prior is, I think everybody's tired of listening to COVID, but I know Tony's got a problem with it in trying to prepare the schools for opening. But in the projections from Mylone and McBroom, are we seeing we're seeing an exodus from the major cities? And are there projections going to take into consideration that where our student population has been flat for so many years, that there now could be a significant increase in the future for us?
Before you
So-
answer, Chuck.
What's that? Two-part answer? Yeah. So let me answer the first one. The first one is taking into account potential efficiencies, energy costs, basically operating costs. If we were to either take offline, certainly that's something we can take into account. And I think the school district probably has historic values of, maintenance costs, utility costs for whether it's Humiston or Darcy, for those at least at a certain level to give us an idea.
So Chuck,
However,
sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead, Randy. Go ahead, Ray.
But I think it's opportune. So we have discussed this as a committee in the past, because Mr. Bowman has brought it up as an important point, and we have a wealth of really great information that Vin and the school department has provided us. So there's a really comprehensive spreadsheet that has all the operating costs of all the schools, including energy, personnel, etc. And that's pretty well spelled out. There's a ton of rows on that spreadsheet. I think the next step is to take that and crunch those numbers in a more comprehensive manner so that they can be compared apples to apples. And it would be great if you could take a look at that and provide guidance as to how we can do that, if that is something that you guys could take a look at, or what would be the next step on that, because there is a ton of information that has been provided and is available.
Some of that information was inaccurate, though. It needed to be updated. Some of the teacher salaries, I think, were probably put in there. There was mistakes in the input of some of the information. The other thing is, I believe that Vin had said that some of the information was also done on a square footage basis as opposed to an actual cost basis, where they took an overall cost of, I'm going to just take maintenance, and then divided it by the square footage of each school, and use that proportionately for each school, as opposed to having the actual numbers for the maintenance or the insurance or some of the other items for those buildings. So we do have the information and that was given, but it really needs to be reviewed and tweaked, in my opinion, to have the accurate information that you're going to need as to our cost savings in,
Right.
closing a specific school.
And I think that, whoever's taking a deep dive into that information can point out which specific items need additional research, or if they're good enough for the purposes of the analysis that we're trying to make. I mean, I there's so much information in there that I think it's worth a shot scrubbing through it. And then if there's any, one or two items that need revision, just a quick phone call with Ben probably can be figured out. So Chuck, I think that's in the Dropbox, but I'll have it here as a follow-up item to just go through that and have a breakout session on that specific spreadsheet.
Just to get to the second part with Malone's projections, we'll have to wait and see on that, Matt. Malone, this is so fresh. I mean, this is only 6 months in the grand scheme of at least in my opinion, of this type of a situation. 6 months is just scratching the surface to see what the trends are doing. Certainly seeing it down in southeastern Connecticut where I live, and New Yorkers buying other homes and coming into the suburbs. But they also work with a lot of other districts in the state, so they should have as good of an idea as any firm to kind of what's going on with the migration out of the city and more towards Connecticut. But whether there's a depth of knowledge there, it's hard to say right now. It's still too early, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Warrington today? All right. Thank you very much for the update, Chuck. Appreciate it a lot.
If you don't mind, I got to go pick up my daughter. If you don't mind, I'm going to adjourn if that's okay with you.
All right.
I just got to go pick her up. My apologies. I'm running a little bit late. So.
No worries. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chuck.
Thank you much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Kimball, do we have any public comment at this time?
So I just looked in the comments email. There are no comments tonight, and there's nothing on the voicemail. So there are none.
Okay, before we adjourn, I have two quick items here. One of them is the next meeting, or next meetings, when this whole COVID pandemic started, we followed the guidance of the state of Connecticut and followed the lead of what the town council was doing and the BOE was doing in terms of holding the meetings virtually. Waited a couple weeks, then started resuming the meetings, but just looking to get the feedback from the BOE and town council members that are part of this committee, if there's been any conversations about resuming and going back to in-person at some point in time. Mr. Pergini.
Yeah, we've been, Board of Ed's been working with central office here on getting back to either a fully in-person meeting, or I hate to use a hybrid, but a hybrid meeting where we have some folks in person as well as remote. And Mike Salmini, who's our townwide AV person, is waiting on some microphone equipment to come in. It's been on back order for 5 weeks now. So for Board of Ed, it's just a matter of having that set up and ready. Unfortunately, Rob's not here tonight. I believe the same equipment the town council will be using. And, the idea is it's not just as easy as us showing up with our laptops, turning on Zoom, but there's a broadcast component to it. But I guess the audio is the thing that they're waiting on. So we'd like to try that. The other thing the board might try to do soon, maybe for the following, not tomorrow's meeting, but the one either for the school reopening or close to it, is we're purchasing some technology, classroom technology, allow a live classroom setting. So we might try to use that, but we're not quite there yet. So the interim, we're still doing our Google Meet with YouTube Live and taking email questions. But I know Sean and town council are a little bit more ahead on trying to get in person back up. So let them speak to what they're doing.
But I think Sean could probably fill you in more, but we're in the same boat. We're still waiting for microphones, and I believe it will be like a hybrid where we did see a big 65-inch TV that it may still be there, Sean, unless somebody took it. But that we're going to be using for virtual people to ask questions, I believe. But we're hoping that by our next meeting in September, we have everything in place.
Well, so yeah, I'll just, without getting too deep into the details, we have the room, council chambers set up right now in sort of a maximum number you could put. We put all the tables where they need to be, the microphone lines. As Tony said, the microphones have been on back order for a while, and we obviously, for obvious reasons, can't have anyone sharing microphones. So, an additional soundboard was purchased that will accommodate, instead of 8 inputs, 16 inputs. So, the week is definitely in motion, but there, even at that point, I would point out that for the council, which is a 9-member group, once you start spacing everyone out, plus staff, and whether staff are in remotely or virtual, in person, the room fills up quicker than you might expect. So we may have to have some sort of hybrid approach. But yes, the goal would be to have everyone in a room and the public still accessing through either YouTube or, again, able to provide in-person, quote unquote, comment through the broadcast television. But those things have to be ironed out once they're ready to go. So we're getting there, but I don't think it'll be better school modernization meeting. That's for sure.
Great, thanks for the update. Any additional comments on that? All right, great. So I'll just continue following up on that. So we as a committee are prepared to make that transition. The next item I had was our next meeting is scheduled for Labor Day, September 7th. I don't know about you guys, but maybe we could pick a different date. I'm not sure if we want to spend Labor Day in a meeting. So would there be an appetite to reschedule that meeting? My initial thought was to reschedule it to the week prior, but knowing that we may not have the additional member a week prior, I'm not sure if that would be productive. Unless the town council can make a decision on the additional member at a off-schedule meeting, because honestly, there's not that much for the town council to decide. It's basically appointing the one and only member that could fill that role, right?
Renee, we'll bring it up to Rob and see if need be. I'm sure we can have a quick, even a Zoom meeting to choose that person.
Well, I think if indeed it follows the rules, it has to be a minority member, and the only minority member
Right.
is Mr. Jinks. So I think it should be a fairly simple process. And you're right, Don. I think we could have a quick Zoom meeting. We do those occasionally when our backs are to the wall. And sometimes we're pretty quick, 10 or 15 minutes, but we have to get together to do that. So I think, Sean, unless you see any other reason why that would be a problem, I think we certainly could accommodate a meeting date, but I'm not sure if we could accommodate it for next Tuesday. Is that you were wanting to move the SMC meeting to what date? The 1st of
I would
September?
say the week of September 31st, which is, I'm sorry, August 31st.
So we'd have to do it by next week.
Correct.
I don't see a problem. I know, Sean, you're going to be away, but Arnett will be here, so it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, it's a quick meeting. I think we could do that.
I would think.
Renee, I would go ahead and schedule the meeting, and I'll talk to Rob, and Sylvia can talk to Rob, and I'm sure we can get this done for you before that. I don't think
Renee,
that's.
are we going to have anything particularly new to deal with by August 31st?
Yeah, that's the other question I had too.
Not very far from now.
No, that is correct. And knowing what Collier shared with us today in regards to schedule, that also plays a factor. If we were to cancel the Labor Day meeting, the next meeting in the calendar would be for Wednesday, September 16th, which is the time where Colliers would share the findings from the projection study. So perhaps it makes sense just to wait until then. Although that will probably be a pretty packed agenda that day because it will not only include the Colliers report, but potentially a chair and vice chair election. That would be my only concern.
I think it makes
Is it-
sense to do it on the 16th if you're asking. I mean, it doesn't seem like we have any new business to talk about here in
Right.
a week and a half's time if we don't have anything new from Colliers.
I would agree. And I'm sorry, Jen.
Sorry, I would agree also with Chuck. I don't think it's necessary to have a meeting in 2 weeks just to have a chair election. If that's all we have on the
Yeah.
agenda, we can certainly take care of that on the 16th. And the fact that September has the first Monday in 1 week and the second Wednesday the very next week, I don't see a need to have meetings back to back in 2 different weeks there either. So if they
Okay.
have the meeting on the 8th and pick the new member,
Mhm.
we could meet on the 16th and take care of everything. I think that makes the best use of everyone's time.
I agree.
All
Yeah,
right.
I don't speak for Jeff or Ben, but you know, the week of September 8th through 11th, we have school opening, a lot of moving parts. We have negotiations ongoing with one of our unions. So if on the 16th, I think that gives, not that I need to be here or Jeff has to be here, but it gives us time. I think if there's any committee members interested in any of the chair positions that have some time to do some research on that and get ready for the 16th, and maybe reach out to some of us for support, et cetera. So I like the 16th myself, but again, I'll support what the committee wants to do on this.
I would agree totally on the 16th.
Okay. So
Renee,
does
can I just
anyone
ask
oppose-
one thing though for that meeting on the 16th? Perhaps have an executive session to update us on one of our past executive sessions that we had discussed. I think we should hear an update on where we are. It was probably about a month and a half ago we had an executive session.
I agree with Don on that one. I would like an update on that as well.
You mean an executive session that we had a month and a half ago?
Yes, regarding real estate transactions and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, we'll make sure that makes the agenda. Thank you. All right, so I think it's settled. We'll meet again on the 16th. Lastly, I just want to thank everybody for joining in today. I know we had a rough meeting last time, so I don't want to just brush over that. I do thank everyone for their volunteering and their commitment and their willingness to show up here and move our very important cause forward. So thank you everyone for that. And with that, I would like to call for adjournment of tonight's meeting.
So
Move.
move.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have everyone a good night.
Good night.
Good night.